Hi, everyone. From the SOC today, I'm joined by Megan Whited, Technical Learning Experience Coordinator here at Deepwatch. Megan has been a longtime analyst and has taken on this new role to help make sure that our delivery resources here at Deepwatch are able to keep their edge through focusing on meaningful, timely training. So thank you for taking some time today with us, Megan.
Oh, you betcha. No worries.
In an industry, Megan, that is so often focused on automation and AI and what the machines and the computers can do for us, what is it that makes the role of analyst continue to endure and be so important for security operations?
Uh, Ultimately, AI automation, they're tools, right? They're tools that we can't ask questions of how did you get to this answer? How did you break down exactly what you looked at? And like when potentially bad things are happening, like incidents or things like that, you kind of want that human being that is, you can say, hey, well, did you look in this log source? What other events are you looking at? What have we seen before? What is your experience with this kind of thing? And does this look like other events that have happened like it? And nothing in the tech kind of space, you know, recreates that experience. And so, when you're looking at really high stress situations, especially if an incident's happening, you want a human being to talk to and kind of hold your hand through it. And I just, we can always use tool sets. We can always enhance our abilities and enhance our processes, but it doesn't replace the human element of an analyst.
So when you're looking at people to be analysts, what are some of the traits that you should really focus on and look for to make sure you've got sort of the right people that are going to take on that role?
I would say like three key traits. When we're hiring, we're looking for people with, curiosity, critical thinking, and ambition. Analysis work in and of itself is very curiosity driven work. You just kind of want to keep peeling the onion away to find out the answer of a needle in a haystack, or get to the center of what's happening. And you have to be a naturally curious person to do that work and be interested in that work. But also, you're taking that curiosity into that, you're learning a metric ton of things to get that foundational knowledge to do that job. And then you're taking that kind of layer of critical thinking on top of it and saying, okay, this is how this applies here. You're parsing all of these things that you've learned down into layman's terms where you're, and especially again, kind of going back to the incident type situation, into layman's terms that can be quickly digested and decisions can be made upon by key stakeholders. And you have to make those judgment calls, right? So it does take that level of critical thinking to be able to do that work well. And then finally, ambition. It can be a loaded word, ambition, but I don't think I've met a single analyst that succeeds, that does well in their position, without a sense of ambition that has driven them to say, you know what, I'm going to go set up that home lab, in my after hours. I'm going to go, take this additional certification, even though it's not required for my job. It's that sense of, just always pushing forward and always wanting to build their own skill set that sets them apart as just, the ideal analyst.
So Megan, if I'm a SOC leader, right, and I've got these resources, what do I need to do to get them into the right space or sort of the right frame of mind? What do I need to do to ensure that my analysts are going to get the training they need?
Um, I would say you want to make sure that you've hired folks at a good foundational knowledge level of, operating systems, network analysis, some threat modeling, incident response, stuff like that. And then you're building on it. You're creating a bridge. You're building a bridge between that foundational knowledge and the tool sets that you may have in your environment, like a CrowdStrike, a SIEM like Splunk or Sentinel. But your job is to, build out what these very curious, ambitious folks have already put into place and saying, okay, now this is what it looks like in your day-to-day work. This is what you've been learning about in terms of malicious activity. This is what it actually looks like in like a log source. That's what you need to be creating training around and efficiencies around.
So let's expand on that. What are some of the curriculum items that you would suggest you want to focus on with your analyst resources?
In addition to tool sets like, Splunk, CrowdStrike, Sentinel, MITRE ATT&CK framework, things like that. MITRE ATT&CK's not a tool set, it's a threat model, but it does give you a better sense of behavior patterns for people, threat activity. And so the more that you can add context to a single alert in your SIEM, the more value you're bringing to your analysis, because ultimately all of these things, it's never just a single event. You don't just have failed password, it's going to be a chain of events if it's a malicious activity. So anything that we can provide training wise to give a broader context to not only the tool set, but to the anatomy of a threat event. I think that's where you want to start.
Wonderful. So as you're planning out that curriculum and you're thinking about, the culture that you need to create and things along those lines, what are some training focused mistakes that SOC leaders, people that are trying to help analysts learn need to avoid?
Sure. Okay. So my big one is just like this set it and forget it attitude of like, you know what, I've got this nice LMS. I'm going to assign you this training path, and you're going to have 48 hours of continuing education. You know what? You're going to be right where I need you to be, analyst. Like, that's kind of like a recipe for disappointment, because you're kind of going back to our previous conversation, you're not creating those bridges between like a foundational knowledge and the actual tool set or environment that you're working in. And information ages pretty quickly in this industry. So if you're not like continuously reviewing those courses on that cert path or learning path, you don't know if stuff is still relevant for people. I mean, it kind of comes back to just continuously not only reviewing, but getting feedback from people who are taking that training and saying, you know what, this was relevant for my job. Thank you for giving me that. Or, maybe we could probably skip this and save 2 hours, and maybe here's this other thing that we could do that does a better job of trying to get the point across that we're trying to do. And then, really the biggest mistake is not fostering a learning culture in your organization. You can take it from the micro of, a SOC itself all the way up to an enterprise, but ultimately it's the learning culture that you've got to foster that people will be interested in pursuing continuing education on their own. Because I don't know about you, but if somebody says go do these 8 hours worth of courses in order to like keep your job, you're not terribly enthused to go do that. You want to be able to pursue things that are of interest to you, that benefit you in your career in the long run. And with the analyst group and with SOC, most of those things align. Where those training paths that people are interested in pursuing are definitely, usually in parallel with what directly benefits the SOC. So drive the win-win, foster that culture where you're like, I'm going to give you the resources and minimal guidance, some guidance, because I want to make sure that we're like in the purview of what our job role is. But you know what? I'm going to trust that you're an ambitious, critical thinker. And, if I can say, yeah, that I see that as relevant to your role, go for it. And trust that I'm not going to micromanage you to get it done. But eventually what you'll do is build a true learning culture, a true learning organization which is self-propagating, because the goal again is not to have to tell people you need to go do ABC training. The goal is that they're going out and finding this stuff and coming back to you all excited about, hey, I did this training and it applies to my job. And I just went and told 4 people who I work with on my shift about it. It's great. Like, I want that as opposed to a checklist of 12 people on this shift have not completed it. And I'm going to just start holding people to the fire, trying to get it done.
So, clearly you're suggesting a strategy of culture and a strategy of an interest in learning. But let's be just a little bit more tactical at the moment. If I'm that SOC leader, and maybe I've only got 10 total analysts because I'm just the SOC leader for my organization, or maybe I'm a SOC leader like folks here at Deepwatch who have quite a few more analysts, right? Either way, what are some of the sort of training delivery tools or the training delivery vehicles that we've seen worked best for analyst training? Perhaps what are some of the best, if not actual names of training sources, but what are the best sort of types of training that we've seen work well for analysts?
Hands-on and hands-on and hands-on. Like, it's being able to work with somebody one-on-one or, in small group, and saying, this is the bridge between what you know and what we're seeing. So I'm going to show you, side by side, this is how you triage this alert in this tool set, and how you work through it and explain it to eventually, the stakeholder, whoever that may be. People retain, knowledge better through those kind of relationship-based training experiences. Now, cue shadowing, meaningful feedback, like based on actual analysis that they've written up, something like that. Like, that all goes back to that kind of like very hands-on, very relational training. But it all comes back to that, you're engaged with the people that you've hired in their training and in their career pathing. You're not just saying, hey, you've got this learning resource over here, go take some time off of your shift to go do that. Thanks, bye.
So we've talked about, what sort of traits you look for in a great analyst. We've talked a lot about the kind of training mindset and some of the training capabilities. But now the next problem is, of course, we've got to measure the success of our training program.
Sure.
What thoughts do you have on how to properly and successfully measure the efficacy of a training program?
Measuring a training program can be a little tricky, because you don't necessarily directly measure the training program itself. You measure the reflection of that program through the performance of the analysts. You're looking for how their job performance has improved over time, with the introduction of training. You're looking for direct measures of things like, time to investigate, or accuracy in investigation, things like that. But then you're also measuring kind of more subjective things like job satisfaction. Do you feel like you are in an environment where you can trust that you're going to have the resources that you need to complete the training that you need to do your job well? So it's a mix of things, and we solve for that, through kind of like a complicated matrix, but it really gives us a bigger picture of where an analyst is in their career path, in their job performance, but also on the back end, how we're doing in training end to be able to enable that growth.
So let's close out with one last question. I want to turn the tables a little bit. Let's suggest that I'm an analyst at a company, and there's only 3 or 4 or 5 of us. It's a small SOC, whatever the case may be, and frankly, I'm kind of left to my own devices to figure out my own training. What are some resources or suggestions you might have for me in that situation?
Sure. So I would say if you're in a spot where you are not getting what you need from a support learning kind of element, I would say start a home lab, right? It doesn't have to be expensive. It's one of those things that a lot of folks are doing through virtualization nowadays. But that gives you on so many levels, not only the hands-on exposure, but you have to be a pretty curious person to go out and find your YouTube, your LinkedIn Learning, your Cybrary, all of those resources to figure out how to set that stuff up. Um, and once you have it set up, once you have your kind of purple team lab where you're possibly setting things off and then seeing if you can detect it on this end. I mean, you're already just miles ahead of the game, right? Because you're not only built out your foundational knowledge and can answer, all the way around the block of this is what this thing does, this is what the logging looks like, this is what bad looks like. I mean, you're probably accelerating yourself out of your position as it is, and you're only helping yourself. And then yeah, I will kind of end on that, I think.
So Megan, thanks for joining us today. I think if I could summarize what you were saying, the first part is a great analyst is going to show traits of curiosity, critical thinking, and ambition. And what we as SOC leaders need to do is help foster an environment where learning is of interest and learning is rewarded and supported. And we need to make sure that we're focusing on hands-on training as much as possible, because that seems to be the most effective. Obviously, there's other training as well, but we've got to do that training across such a broad variety of tools and technologies, not just the ones that the SOC might be using, but the ones that the data sources, the data coming into the SOC are generating from. And then we really need to help make sure that the curious among the analysts have access to the tools they need to do that training. And from that, you're going to have the best success with your SOC analyst pool. So Megan, again, thank you for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much, Bill. I appreciate it. Thank you. Have a good one.